So we're here at the exhibition Exploding View, Gordon. This is sort of like the main piece in the exhibition. It's called Church.
Yeah.
Can you just explain the construction of it and what the actual piece is about?
Well, the construction of it, I built my own studio where I live, and this is kind of the limits of the studio space that I have now. I actually built this outside of my studio in a large, pretty much traditional 1950s Irish barn. So I wanted to build the church to the limits of the space that I had. So maybe if I had a bigger space, this church would have been bigger, or a smaller space, it would have been smaller. But I wanted to make it almost like a piece of furniture that you can disassemble and reassemble, so it has a kind of a mobility to it, that it moves around. And that, I suppose, is kind of expressed in the fact that the church is also lifted up off the ground. So it has a certain lightness to it, it has a certain material lightness to it, and in some way it's an object rather than a functioning church. With the beams of wood going through it, it actually makes it literally impossible to get into the church, although you could kind of go underneath it. But it wouldn't function as a church. And it's kind of like a model of a church, but a maximum model, if that makes sense. So I'm interested in the sweet spot between a model, as in a toy, and something real, or something that would be relatable in a kind of a real sense. And actually, when you bring it into a room like this, which is a kind of a cathedral in essence. I would almost consider an art institution or an art gallery to be a modern church to a certain extent. This, I think, even works even more now that it's here. And that was kind of the fun and the fear of making this work, is that you're making it from a distance. So it's like a site-specific work that you're making off-site. So I was kind of interested in those unknown elements to it, those unknown qualities, and to assemble, disassemble, assemble, and see what happens, see how it finds itself in this room. So it's almost like a tribute to architecture, or a tribute to Wild West movies, and actually at the moment, this won't come across in the video, but outside it's freezing cold, and I've never enjoyed the work more, because it just reminds me of that kind of almost New England look.
Sure, yeah.
Like the 1700s, the 1800s is a period of time that I'm quite actually obsessed with. Yeah. But it's almost like I think a lot of artists might be able to relate to that. It's not so much anything else other than an aesthetic interest.
But I mean,
like
it's a stylistic piece.
It's a stylistic piece, of course. It's
based on a certain style of church.
Based on a certain style of church, but in some way it's kind of like a child's church. It's kind of, if someone came in and said, "Gordon, make a church, this is my church. This is what I would make." So it's like when you see a child, they draw a picture of a car. That's what to them a car is, or what a house is, or what a barn is, or what a chicken is, or whatever. This is my kind of almost innocent, childlike version of what I see as a church, and that's why I call the work church. Like, if you gave it any other name, or gave it any other kind of description or some kind of title, it would divert away from what it's really about. It's about the physical church itself, and how you relate to it as a spectator depends on how you see churches, I suppose, or what your experience is. But I'm trying to take the religion out of it and just see it as an object, and I just it pleases me. That's the extent of my goal in this, in some way. And the church structure, and particularly this kind of clapboard style, is something that's come into my work for, God, it must be 20 years now. Yeah. I keep coming back to this. As much as I try not to, I can't help it. I keep coming back to it, I go down one road and I come back, it's a church again. So on it goes, and I'm already on the next version. But it's in the process where all this happens. So I didn't fully conceive this until I was really building it, Although when I made a model of this about a year or two ago to propose to you for the exhibition space, it's actually probably the closest I've ever done a work where the model of the work actually ended up looking pretty much like the end work. So that surprised me, because sometimes it's most of the time it's better not to know what the result will be,
I think there's a thing here with regards to sort of the sacred aspect of a church or whatever, but you've sort of removed by like lifting it up off the ground from its space.
I've kind of defrocked it, or deconsecrated it. But that's not so much seen as a cynical way. I think there is obviously maybe political or points about religion in that in some way, but I'm not really making a point for or against that to a certain extent. I think that's up to the individual spectator who sees something like this, And it's like, I've been talking to so many people while this exhibition is on, and it's a common occurrence that people will say, I don't like religion, but I love churches. So it's not that I'm necessarily trying to make that message, but this is kind of, I can relate to that, because I think I have a similar feeling when it comes to my own constructs. You know, I love to go into churches, the craft, and that, you know, that thing of how do we deal with the unknown. You know, we know just as little now as we did a million years ago about what's out there, and, you know, so we're not getting more intelligent when it comes to that, and the great unknown is mysterious, but I find it kind of almost funny that we try to rationalize it through a piece of architecture, you know, and that can be beautiful. And the attempt at explaining the unexplainable, the effort of it, I think is worth kind of referencing, or worth thinking about, you know, without all the baggage that's obviously coming with it, you know, the politics and all the other aspects, is particularly in modern society, you know.
Gordon, just with regards to this piece, these pieces on the wall, this constellation of pieces that you have on the wall, they're obviously like quite similar with regards to the actual construction.
They are. They seem to have kind of a beginning and an end element to it, and again, kind of subconsciously, it's just a general interest. Like the works themselves are actually made up of older works, so the centerpieces of these works are little elements of a larger installation, not on this scale of the church, but similar enough kind of construct that I did about 10 or 15 years ago. And in some way, in a humorous way, I just wanted to bring in the history of my own work into the work. So it kind of creates almost like it gives them some kind of, it's almost like a tribute to them or a continuation of them. So again, not so literal, but more kind of it seems to have worked out that way, that the church is almost an origin and this is a continuation and a spreading. So the exhibition overall I titled Exploding View as well for that kind of reason. It's when you buy new equipment, if you buy a new table saw or if you buy something for your studio and you look through the catalogue, or look through the guidelines, which most people don't do, but you get to the back of it and there's always that exploding view at the back with everything fired out, all spread out. And in some way I see this as, in some way, the elements that were originally together now finding their own new identity. So there's definitely a relationship with them, that kind of overlapped board again, which I can't stop obsessing over. My wife will tell you this, sometimes when I'm lighting the fire at home and I'm putting a stick into the fire that I've made kindling, I'm like, that stick was actually part of the fireplace that was in this house that we dropped out 5 years ago when we cleaned it out. That's been lying in the barn for a few years, and I used it actually to wedge open the door that time, and now I broke it up and here it is. Finally going back to the God. So I always play with that idea. I always find that kind of legacy of objects, but to you, that's something that you impose on something because you've spent time with it. And these little elements that are in these works, I actually transported them back from Germany with me. I've transported that installation building. I folded it up. I took it apart, a little bit like the church is taken apart. Didn't really know what I'm going to do with it, but I didn't really have the heart to throw it out. Yeah. We'd been through a lot together, me and that, me and that building. So I brought it with me, and then eventually, they just found a new home, which I find there's maybe a little bit of even humor in that for myself. I've kind of made the objects that could have been thrown into a bin, I've made them sacred. And again, I've brought them into what is the cathedral of culture, into an art gallery. So how more sacred can rubbish become, So yeah, there is a little bit of romanticism in it, a little bit of nostalgia or a reference to that. And yeah, but there's definitely, I think, an aesthetic relationship, kind of an origin and an ending going on. I was fooling around with different materials, different things, seemed to get something, and then eventually these started to click and started to come together. And then these little elements of work just seemed to match perfectly with them. And I've kind of played around with some of that through individual works over the last few years, but this was the first kind of time that I, decided to make a series. So the technique used is very quick. So it's very expressive and very quick. And I found that with the blowtorch, you could actually do that very easily. So it's a mixture of blowtorch, regular tools like scraping brushes and oils that I use to kind of create this kind of almost romantic, this romantic kind of background. And just with regards to frames then on these pieces, they're all different colours, which is quite an attractive thing to the eye. They're all... Are they like different like paint types, or? They're all different paint types, and they're actually it's a kind of a domestic paint that you'd use for your modern kitchen or for whatever units you're painting at home. So I actually wanted to use that, and I wanted to give them their own frame, their own world. That's in some way that's what we all do. We have our own style. We have our own. We sometimes we give ourselves a name, or Sure. So I actually ended up naming the individual works after the name of the color. And I found that quite funny and interesting, and it just added a bit of, it allowed them to stand out as individuals, even though they're all obviously of the same origin, you know.
So, Gordon, this is the oldest piece in the exhibition, I think, from 2009.
Yeah, it's the oldest piece. This goes back a long, long time, and this is a kind of a little kind of, kind of a interactive work, or a, I don't know how to make it sound good. It's basically controlled graffiti, but I did this actual one itself. The stickers on, they were actually put on, they're not put on digitally, they're actually real black pieces of tape that were stuck onto these street signs. I did that about 15 years ago, roughly, but that's just one of many, many different versions that I did. And this one, just particularly, if I look back at all the different ones that I did, this is the one that really pleases me the most, because it makes sense of something that no longer has sense, and it opens it up to different interpretations. And if you're not aware of these street signs, if you didn't grow up in Ireland or grow up in the United States where they have similar ones, and I remember showing this to people over in Germany, they just thought, wow, that's public art, really interesting. They just saw them as paintings in the landscape. And it has an element to it, if you are going through Europe, sometimes you see signs that are similar enough that are actually marking memorial sites from the world wars that were fought in Europe. So here in Ireland, on a very rural area, not so far from where I grew up, I kind of knew that these signs didn't really play a function anymore, because anyone who's driving through this crossroads that's coming up is from the area. It's not a main road, it's barely a side road. So I kind of took the reality of it having no longer really a function, and I just wanted to playfully open it up. Now, as I said, I did this 15 years ago. I think the world has changed so much in 15 years and I've got older, that I probably wouldn't have the nerve to do this anymore. But the reason I wanted to bring it in here is that I really think some of those obsessions I've had, you can see them, they go back a long time. So again, like with the flet works, you want to show your own history in some way, that this is something that's going on for a long time, and the work really is the result of process. But I think in here you can kind of see the depth of process that I've been, playing with. And it has a playful, spontaneous element to it as well. Now, I showed these photographs in different ways before, but this time I kind of wanted to have quite a formal structure, good framing, and it kind of repeats the cross shape again. So it almost adds a multi-dimensional aspect to something that is essentially a two-dimensional object that's representing a three-dimensional space. So it's an artistic language in some way, in a playful, light-hearted way,
I think with regards to, what's interesting to me as well is that the actual thickness of the lines that you've added in, they give sort of a depth to that.
Exactly, it gives a depth of feel. So it's almost, again, the sign is a two-dimensional object in a three-dimensional space, and it is referencing a crossroads in front. But if you've never been to Ireland before, you never were here before, and you were driving on the road, you might not know what those signs actually mean. It's like, what's this twist on the sign? Sometimes you come up to a junction where it almost looks like, it's all over the place. And to us, that's just language we grew up with. So it's almost like an alien language for Ireland, or a very homogenous language for here, whereas someone else might see it differently, and it's almost that alien's perspective on it. So I wanted to bring that out, and just playfully, as you said, the crosses are of different size and width, so it does add a three-dimensional aspect to it, It's Bansky before Bansky. I think when you look at a lot of my work, you can definitely tell that I have a strong kind of filmic language is there. Filmic language is definitely there. What film is always kind of obsessed me in some way. It is essentially suspending disbelief and being kind of forced to look at a certain perspective. And I just wanted to play with that in a very simple way. So this is actually made up of, this burnt out house project work is made up of a small little model of, again, a kind of a generic clapboard house, just its facade. And I just playfully in the studio put that model in front of a screen and filmed that, and then I cut that out and layered it on top of the original video, which was a kind of a hyper slow motion of a fire that was going on actually very close to where I live. A farmer close by was burning his hedges after he topped them a while back, and he is required under environmental law to contact me to let me know that he's doing it. Now I think at the moment, they're actually banning the burning of hedges altogether. But it was nice of him, he rang me and said, Gordon, I'm going to be doing that just behind your field. So I just wanted to let you know. And then I just said, right, I'm going to go out and film it. So I just went out and filmed it because it's just looked amazing. In the middle of winter, this big, huge fire. So I just filmed that and then playfully on my editing suite just kind of constructed this together, Very simple.
And did the fire in this is in slow motion, obviously?
Yeah, actually everything in that video, and the video is quite long, I'd say it's probably in total about 4 or 5 seconds in total of fire. I stretched it as much as I could, and I added on a kind of a very simple digital blending technique in it that kind of created this distorted waxing and waning of these flames. And as I was making it, it actually reminded me again of that other thing that obsesses me, which is the cosmos and the galaxy. And if you look at the web of all the galaxies and how they might animate that on some science program, it actually has a kind of it has an echo of that kind of galactic structure or that cosmic structure. So yeah, so it just created this really dramatic, spectacular, emotional aesthetic. And then I layered music on top of that, which is actually music done from an artist that I've been working with for years, Jeff Quill. Jeff and me have been collaborating for just over the years, making music videos together. Jeff is a kind of he mightn't agree with me, but I would say that he has a similar approach in how he approaches his music as I approach my art, almost in a childlike, innocent kind of way, and just sees as he's accidentally rumbling through and see what he finds. And I think while I was editing, actually most of the stuff that I edit to Jeff's music anyway, even if I'm not using it, because it's just kind of it has a certain alien quality to it that I've always found very. It allows me to get into a certain pace and into a certain kind of timing when it comes to making videos. So with this, I just really wanted to include it in it because I think it's just as important as the flames and just as important as any of the layers that are in it. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for allowing us to see it exploding.
You're more than welcome. I'm delighted to have showed the work here at the Source. It's been an amazing experience, and just on that point of having my first solo show in Ireland, sometimes it can be quite daunting for the artist to put all your findings together for the first time. It's almost like having your children back together for Christmas or something. It can lead to a lot of stress, as we all know, and but I've been quite happy. I think it's been a great thing, and it's great to finally bring them together because now I know roughly where they're all going. I can see the next steps, and that's really, I think, been the biggest benefit for me from having this solo show. It's really, it's the first time I've really mapped out all my work together in one place, which has been brilliant. And thanks to you, Brendan, for choosing to work, and thanks to the Source and everyone here. It's been great. Thanks a million.
Thank you very much.